Ethan Monroe had always thought he had moved on, for years had passed since the divorce. Yet he felt a hollow weight every time a memory of Sophia crept into his mind. He tried to immerse himself in work, in friendships, in small pleasures, but there was a persistent echo of loss he could not silence. His apartment, minimal and orderly, reflected the man he had become: organized, efficient, but lacking warmth. The absence of Sophia's laughter, her energy, her very presence, made the walls feel colder than they should have. At IT was a Thursday afternoon when he decided to attend a networking event he had initially dismissed. His friends had insisted he join, claiming it would be good for his social life. But Ethan's mind wandered even as he nodded along to small talk and polite introductions. He had grown accustomed to polite smiles and safe conversations, the kind that never threatened to disturb the fragile balance he had constructed in his life. As he moved through the crowd of strangers and acquaintances, his gaze swept over the room almost automatically until it stopped, sharp, involuntary, and unprepared. She was there, Sophia Carter, his Sophia. She looked different yet unmistakably herself. Her posture exuded confidence, her eyes bright with intelligence and purpose. Her hair was neatly styled, her attire professional and elegant, signaling a woman who had carved out her own place in the world. There was an aura around her that made him both ache and admire, a combination of grace and authority he remembered well. Ethan froze, caught somewhere between surprise and disbelief. Sophia glanced toward the entrance, and her eyes met his. For a brief instant, the years fell away, and he saw her as she had been, the woman he had loved and, more painfully, the woman he had betrayed. A flicker of recognition passed across her features, but she did not rush toward him. There was a measured composure in her expression, a quiet acknowledgement of the past without giving it permission to intrude. Ethan's mind raced. He had imagined this moment countless times in the privacy of his regrets, running into her, begging forgiveness, finding some way to make amends. But now, confronted with the reality, he realized how unprepared he was. Words failed him. His throat felt dry. The confident, assertive man he had cultivated for the world suddenly seemed small and uncertain. He noticed something he had not expected: a ring. Subtle yet unmistakable, a symbol of commitment and a life he had no part in. Sophia's hand rested lightly on the arm of a man Ethan had not yet identified, but the presence alone was enough to pierce through his thoughts. The realization hit him with unexpected force. She had moved on. She was married. She had built a life he was no longer part of, but a mixture of emotions surged through him: shock, disbelief, and an immediate, gnawing regret. He remembered the reckless choices that had led to their divorce, the nights he had spent ignoring the love he now saw thriving elsewhere. His mind flicked to all the moments he had taken for granted, the apologies left unsaid, the trust betrayed. Sophia's new life was evident not only in her appearance, but in the way she interacted with others. She laughed freely with colleagues, engaged in conversations with intelligence and ease, and moved through the room with a sense of purpose that was entirely her own. Ethan realized, painfully, that she had not just survived the end of their marriage. She had flourished. The man beside her stepped slightly forward as if acknowledging Ethan's gaze. He was tall, well-groomed, exuding a calm confidence that suggested authority. Ethan immediately recognized the subtle cues of someone used to leadership and success. The brief glance exchanged between Sophia and this man was intimate yet reserved, a quiet assertion that she belonged here. With him, Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered how easily he had taken Sophia for granted, how thoughtless and self-absorbed he had been when their marriage had begun to crumble. Seeing her now, he could feel the magnitude of what he had lost. His stomach churned with a bitter combination of nostalgia and regret. Despite the emotional storm inside him, Ethan forced himself to step forward, hesitantly, into the space between strangers. He needed to say something, even if only to acknowledge the years that had passed. Sophia turned slightly as if anticipating his approach, her expression carefully neutral. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm, steady, and composed. It carried a warmth he had not anticipated, yet there was no invitation, no trace of the intimacy they had once shared. Just recognition. He nodded, words caught somewhere between his conscience and his pride. Sophia, he managed, his voice rougher than intended. For a moment, the crowd around them blurred into insignificance. He searched her face for any sign of the woman he had loved, hoping, foolishly, for a trace of the past. But she had changed, and yet she had remained unmistakably herself, resilient, graceful, and far beyond the reach of his past mistakes. Sophia's attention returned to the conversation at hand, and Ethan was left with the piercing awareness of his own absence from this chapter of her life. He realized, in that instant, that he had no claim on her happiness, no right to the life she now led. The encounter ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Ethan standing at the edge of the room, heart heavy, mind racing. He walked away slowly, replaying every choice he had made, every moment he had squandered. The memory of her smile, now directed at another man, burned into him. For the first time in years, Ethan understood the depth of his own loss and the price of betrayal. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, he felt a mix of longing and resignation. The past had collided with the present, and there was no undoing it. Sophia's life was no longer his, and yet, in that fleeting encounter, she had reminded him of everything he had once had, and everything he would never reclaim. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the encounter, even as he tried to distract himself with work and routine. Every email he typed, every phone call he made, was interrupted by images of Sophia's calm composure, her confident smile, and the subtle but unmistakable bond she shared with the man at her side. The more he thought, the more the weight of his own mistakes pressed down on him, a constant reminder that he had once held something invaluable and had let it slip through his fingers. That evening, he found himself wandering the streets near his apartment, as if searching for clarity among the quiet city lights. He replayed every detail of Sophia's demeanor, every word, every glance. He realized that in those brief moments, he had glimpsed not only her happiness, but also her strength, a strength he had never fully appreciated when they were together. The memory of betrayal that had once seemed distant now felt immediate and visceral. Meanwhile, Sophia was unaware of the storm brewing in Ethan's mind. She had returned to her evening routine with Liam Hawthorne, her husband, a man who complemented her life in ways Ethan could scarcely imagine. Liam was attentive without being overbearing, confident without being arrogant, and deeply respectful of the life Sophia had built. They had shared laughter, discussion of work projects, and even small personal anecdotes, simple exchanges that spoke volumes of the intimacy and trust they now enjoyed. Ethan, on the other hand, was struggling with the duality of his emotions. Part of him wanted to reach out immediately to explain, apologize, and perhaps reclaim some fragment of the life he had lost. Yet another, wiser part of him recognized the impossibility of such a venture. Sophia had moved forward, and his presence could only disrupt the delicate equilibrium she had established. He felt torn between longing and the undeniable truth. He was no longer part of her world. Unable to resist, he returned to the cafe where he had seen her earlier. Perhaps, he thought, a second chance at conversation could provide some closure, or at least a fleeting connection. When he entered, his heart sank slightly. Sophia was laughing lightly at something Liam had said, her hand resting gently on his arm, a subtle yet intimate gesture that communicated comfort, familiarity, and affection. The sight stabbed at him with the sharpness of regret, the kind that could only be felt by someone who truly understood the consequences of their past actions. Ethan's first instinct was to retreat, to fade into the background and let the moment pass. But he hesitated. Something compelled him to step closer, to attempt a conversation, however brief. Sophia noticed his movement, and for a heartbeat, her gaze flickered in his direction. She smiled politely, the same careful neutrality from before, acknowledging his presence without inviting intrusion. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying a subtle warmth that reminded him why he had fallen for her in the first place. He nodded, swallowing hard. Sophia. It's been a long time. The words felt inadequate, almost absurd in the face of everything unsaid between them. Liam turned slightly, his eyes assessing the situation without hostility. He was aware of the subtle tension, the recognition that the man standing near Sophia was someone from her past. But Liam's composure never wavered. He remained confident and measured, radiating a sense of quiet authority that Ethan couldn't ignore. He realized immediately that this was a man who not only matched Sophia's intellect and energy, but protected and respected her in ways Ethan had failed to do. Ethan struggled to articulate his thoughts, each attempt faltering under the weight of years of regret. I just wanted to see how you were doing, he managed, his voice tight. Sophia's expression softened slightly, but her eyes conveyed a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. I'm doing well, she replied. Life's good. There was no bitterness in her tone, only a firm assurance that she had moved forward. The conversation that followed was polite but brief, touching on work, mutual acquaintances, and the occasional neutral anecdote. Yet beneath the surface, every word carried the unspoken truths of their past. The love once shared, the betrayal that had ended it, and the unbridgeable distance that now separated them. Ethan could feel the gap between who they had been and who they had become, a chasm he had created with his own hands. As he observed Sophia interacting with Liam, he couldn't help but notice the ease and authenticity of their connection. Liam laughed at a subtle joke, and Sophia's eyes lit up, a spark that Ethan remembered well, but had no right to claim anymore. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a mutual respect, an understanding that went beyond words. It was a quiet but undeniable declaration. She had found someone who valued and supported her in ways he had neglected to do. That Ethan's heart ached, and the reality of his loss settled over him with an oppressive weight. He realized that nostalgia could not change the present, that longing could not rewrite the choices he had made. The pain of seeing her happy with another man was sharp, but it was also a mirror reflecting his own failings, his inability to remain faithful, to nurture the love they once shared, and to honor the commitment he had made. The afternoon ended with Sophia excusing herself to attend a brief meeting with a colleague, Liam following shortly after. Ethan remained behind, lingering in the cafe longer than necessary, absorbing the emptiness left in the wake of their brief encounter. The sunlight faded through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, symbolic of the distance that now existed between their lives. As he stepped back onto the bustling streets, Ethan understood something crucial. This encounter was not an opportunity for reconciliation, but a stark reminder of what he had lost and what he could never reclaim. Sophia had moved on, thriving in ways that he could not disrupt, and Liam was a presence that commanded respect, love, and stability. Ethan walked away slowly, each step heavy with the realization that he could no longer dwell on the past. The encounter had stirred old emotions, but it had also provided clarity. If he was to find any peace, he would have to confront his regrets honestly, acknowledge the consequences of his actions, and begin the difficult work of moving forward without Sophia in his life. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of acceptance settle over him. And yet, as the city lights flickered around him, he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey he could not ignore, a journey that would force him to face the full measure of his past mistakes and the depth of his own remorse. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He lay on his apartment couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the encounter with Sophia. Each memory was sharper than the last. The way her eyes had met his, the polite calmness in her voice, the subtle warmth that hinted at the woman he had loved yet could no longer claim. The more he thought, the heavier the weight of regret became. Pressing against his chest like a physical force, he tried to reason with himself. Sophia was happy. She had chosen her path. She had moved on. And yet, the thought of her with Liam Hawthorne, the man whose calm confidence complemented her so perfectly, made a dull ache pulse through him. Ethan hated himself for thinking about it, for envying a life he had no right to, for failing to control his own emotions. The man he had once been, careless and unfaithful, now seemed alien to him, yet impossible to escape. The next day, Ethan found himself wandering the neighborhood where he had first encountered her. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps a subconscious hope that he might see her again, perhaps a desperate need to feel some connection to the life that had once been his. And then, as if fate had taken pity, he saw her through the glass door of a boutique she frequented. She was laughing lightly, her eyes shining, a gentle touch on Liam's arm conveying affection and trust. Ethan hesitated at the threshold, torn between desire and respect. He wanted to approach, to explain, to apologize, yet something deeper warned him that this would not be the kind of reunion he had once imagined. Sophia had built something beautiful in these 4 years, a life grounded in self-respect, love, and partnership, and he was an intruder in that world. Finally, he stepped forward, forcing himself into the space without startling her. "Sophia," he said softly. She turned, her eyes widening slightly, but only for an instant. Then she smiled politely, carefully. "Ethan," she replied, her tone neutral but kind. "You're here again." He swallowed hard, trying to articulate the storm of emotions within him. I just wanted to see you," he admitted, voice tight with the weight of confession. "I know I have no right, but I needed to know how you were." Sophia's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of something he recognized, a memory of the past. But it was quickly replaced by composure. "I'm doing well," she said. "Life's been full." "Good, actually." She glanced at Liam, who was browsing nearby, and Ethan noticed a quiet understanding pass between them. They shared a glance that was intimate yet entirely respectful, the kind of connection that comes from years of trust and shared experience. That Ethan's chest tightened. He realized that no apology could bridge the gap between the man he had been and the life Sophia had built. He had betrayed her trust, broken her heart, and lost his place in her world. Each word she spoke, each gesture she made, underscored what he had squandered. "I can see that," Ethan murmured, his voice low. You've really built something remarkable." The words were sincere, filled with admiration he had never properly expressed before. Sophia tilted her head slightly, acknowledging his sincerity but maintaining boundaries. "Thank you," she replied. "It's been a journey." There was no invitation to linger in the past, no longing for what had been, only a quiet affirmation of a life she had created. Ethan felt the sting of envy and remorse in equal measure. He wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to apologize in ways words could never capture. But he knew such gestures would be selfish, disruptive, and unfair to the life she now cherished. His presence alone was a reminder of pain and mistakes she had already moved beyond. That he glanced at Liam, who now approached with a gentle smile. "Ethan, right?" Liam said, extending a hand in a polite, measured manner. There was no hostility, no arrogance, only quiet authority and respect. Ethan shook it, aware that this man had earned a place in the life he had lost. "You've done well," Ethan admitted, not just to Liam but to the universe itself. "You've been good for her." The words carried a weight of humility and surrender. He recognized, painfully, that Liam was the kind of man he should have been, faithful, supportive, and present in the way he had failed to be. Sophia observed the exchange with calmness, her composure unwavering. She had forgiven in her own way, not for Ethan's sake, but to free herself from lingering resentment. And yet, there was a quiet sadness in the moment, a shared acknowledgement of the past that could never be reclaimed. Ethan tried to force conversation, but every sentence felt inadequate. He wanted to articulate the depth of his regret, the realization of what he had lost, the lessons learned too late. I never realized," he said finally, voice breaking slightly, "how much I threw away, how much I hurt you. I wish I could." Sophia placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. "Ethan," she said softly, yet firmly, "you can't undo the past. We lived through it. And now I have my life. Her eyes conveyed compassion, not anger, but also an immovable boundary. She had grown stronger in the years apart, and she would not allow old wounds to reopen unnecessarily. The clarity of her words struck him harder than any anger could. He understood that this was not rejection born of malice, but a lesson in accountability. Life had moved forward, and he had no place in this chapter. Liam's presence only reinforced the reality. Sophia had chosen wisely, and Ethan had paid the price for his mistakes. As they parted ways, Ethan walked alone through the streets, the evening air cool against his face. Each step carried the weight of recognition. He had loved, he had lost, and he had learned the magnitude of his errors. For the first time in years, he confronted the consequences of his actions fully, without deflection or excuse. The encounter left him emotionally raw but aware. Sophia's life was no longer intertwined with his, yet witnessing her happiness provided a mirror for his own shortcomings. He understood that regret alone could not heal him, that forgiveness must begin with oneself, and that moving forward required more than longing. It required honest reflection and growth. By the time he returned home, Ethan had resolved, in some small way, to face the truth of his past and the reality of his present. Sophia had moved on, and he could do nothing to reclaim her life. Yet the encounter had ignited something essential, the realization that his journey was far from over. The road ahead would demand humility, reflection, and the courage to accept the consequences of his choices. For the first time in years, regret was no longer just a shadow, it was a guide. And Ethan knew that the next steps he took would determine whether he could learn from the past or remain trapped by it forever. Ethan woke the next morning with a lingering heaviness, yet beneath it was a faint glimmer of clarity. The previous day's encounter had left him raw, vulnerable, and painfully aware of his mistakes, but had also illuminated a truth he had long avoided. He could not change the past. No words, no actions, no tears could restore what he had lost. Sophia's life was hers, and Liam was the man she had chosen, the man who respected, cherished, and supported her in ways he never had. Accepting that reality was the first step toward his own redemption. He spent the morning in quiet reflection, the sunlight filtering softly through his apartment windows. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his regret, to confront it without defense or distraction. He acknowledged the selfishness of his past, the recklessness that had ended a love that had once seemed unshakable. And as he sat in the stillness, he realized that this acknowledgement was not a defeat. It was an essential beginning. Meanwhile, Sophia's day unfolded with the ease and purpose of a life fully reclaimed. She met with her team at the firm, navigating complex decisions with clarity and confidence. Liam joined her briefly for a discussion about an upcoming project, their collaboration seamless, their mutual respect evident in the subtle gestures they shared, a nod, a glance, a quiet laugh. Watching them, Ethan's mind flashed back to the moments he had taken for granted, the trust he had broken, and the warmth he had once neglected. Yet he also felt a bittersweet sense of relief. Sophia was thriving, her happiness intact, and he had no power to disrupt it. Determined to confront his own path, Ethan made a deliberate choice. He reached out to a friend he had distanced himself from during the years of self-absorption and failure. Over coffee, he spoke openly about the encounter, about the lingering pain, and about the lessons he had learned too late. His friend listened, offering neither judgment nor pity, only the grounding presence that allowed Ethan to begin the slow process of self-forgiveness. The conversation reminded him that moving forward required more than regret. It required action. He could not undo his mistakes, but he could transform the sorrow they had caused into meaningful change. He committed, quietly but firmly, to rebuilding himself, to nurturing honesty, to honoring relationships, and to valuing trust above fleeting desires. It was a daunting task, but one he now approached with a newfound sincerity. Sophia, unaware of Ethan's internal resolution, continued her day with an ease born of hard-won peace. She stopped briefly at a park near her office, enjoying a rare moment of solitude. Liam joined her, carrying coffee and offering a playful smile. They sat together on a bench, sharing the quiet comfort of companionship that had been cultivated over years of mutual respect and love. Sophia's gaze softened, not with nostalgia, but with gratitude for the life she had built, a life she had earned through perseverance, resilience, and the wisdom gained from past hardships. Ethan observed her in memory, acknowledging silently that he could never disrupt the harmony she now enjoyed. His heart ached, yes, but it was an ache tempered by understanding. The happiness he had lost was hers, and it belonged to her. The realization allowed him to release the grasping desire that had lingered for so long. For the first time, he could honor her joy without needing to claim it for himself. Days passed, and Ethan began to apply the lessons of his reflection. He reached out to colleagues with genuine interest, reconnected with family members he had neglected, and engaged in personal projects he had previously abandoned. Each small step reinforced his sense of purpose, reminding him that growth was possible even after profound mistakes. The regret that had once been a sharp sting gradually softened into a quiet, guiding presence, an ever-present reminder that he could shape the remainder of his life differently. Sophia, meanwhile, flourished in her own sphere. She attended a charity gala with Liam, their interactions natural and confident. Observers could see the ease with which they complemented one another, their partnership rooted in trust and shared values. It was a life Ethan had glimpsed briefly and envied, yet he no longer longed to intrude. Instead, he felt a complex mix of sorrow and admiration, emotions that acknowledged the depth of his loss while respecting her present reality. One evening, Ethan returned to the cafe where he had first seen Sophia. The memory of that day was still vivid, but the visit was no longer an attempt at connection. It was a ritual of reflection. He sat quietly, sipping his coffee, allowing the ebb and flow of life around him to wash over his thoughts. He thought of Sophia, of Liam, and of the man he had been, and he realized, with a clarity born of acceptance, that regret could be transformed into growth if only he allowed himself to embrace it fully in that moment. Ethan understood the ultimate truth of his journey. Some losses are permanent, and some opportunities are irretrievable. Yet the pain of those losses need not define the entirety of a life. By acknowledging mistakes, embracing accountability, and committing to personal growth, he could create a life of meaning, honesty, and quiet fulfillment. Sophia's happiness was no longer a threat. It was an example, a testament to what could be achieved through resilience and integrity. The day ended with Ethan walking along the city streets, the evening lights reflecting softly in puddles left by an earlier rain. He felt the cool air on his face, a reminder of the clarity that comes after storms. There was no bitterness, no lingering anger, only the sober knowledge that he had confronted the consequences of his choices and begun to forge a path forward. He did not know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of possibility grounded in honesty and self-awareness. As he turned the corner and disappeared into the quiet hum of the city, Ethan carried with him both the memory of what he had lost and the resolve to live differently. The encounter with Sophia, once a source of anguish, had become a catalyst for transformation. And though their lives would never intersect again in the same way, he had gained something far more enduring: the capacity to face himself, accept the past, and move forward with a sense of purpose he had never before known.